And these are people that this psychiatrist had met while they were in the hospital. He writes down like how she has trouble with like boundaries with men, how she's totally vulnerable to all types of like manipulation from males and like power positions. Basically, he's coming up with the playbook for how he's going to exploit her. So fast forward, she becomes this patient at the spot in North Carolina. He turns her into his girlfriend. He turns another patient into his maid, and he has a third patient who's his yard guy.
Is he having sex with them too? Welcome to another awesome episode of Cases Gone Wild. I'm your host, Jon Marko. This is brought to you by Marko Law. We bring you the craziest, wildest, most insane legal cases from some of the top trial lawyers from Michigan and around the country. If you like our show, please make sure to share it with your friends, your family, strangers, whoever, the guy next to you on the bus. You can watch us. We're filming live. We are also on all your favorite podcast, audio, etc. Make sure you leave us a review. Today we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine who's a wonderful attorney and a wonderful person from the Palmetto State, the great state of South Carolina, Kenneth Berger. Kenny, thanks for being on the show, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me all the way from the Palmetto State.
We love it. As I was talking to you earlier, I love your state. I need to get back to Charleston. I need to come down and visit you and your family. It's been too long. Life gets in the way. Being a trial lawyer is hard. You know, we work too much, and we got to be fighters. So thanks for coming on the show, man. And just tell our listeners a little bit about you. We've how old are you, Kenny, if you don't mind me asking?
I am 42.
Okay, I was going to say, like, I feel like we're at like the same kind of stage in our career. Like we kind of came, I remember, I don't know when we met. It was a long time ago, but we kind of both were at the same level in our firms. I think we both wanted to be better at our craft, hone our craft. And I know you're doing just excellent. I've watched your career. I've watched you personally. I've seen the things that you're doing down there in South Carolina, your firm grow and grow and grow. And I'm just so proud of you and the amazing trial lawyer that you've developed into. Tell our listeners just a little bit about you and your firm and what's it like down in South Carolina.
Yeah, and congrats on all your successes too.
Thank you.
Yeah, you and I met at Nick Rowley's Trial by Human Ranch out in Montana a few years ago, and at the time, we were both doing well, and thank God, since then, it's continued to go in the right trajectory. So down here, I'm from South Carolina. I moved around a bunch. I didn't know if I wanted to stay here or not, so I was in Seattle for a while. I spent a summer in Boston, lived up in D.C. briefly, and what I realized every time I left, there's like an old T.S. Eliot line about you don't know home until you leave and return.
Yeah.
And for me, ultimately, this was home. It's where I wanted to live and practice. So I went to law school down here. When I first got out, I was working for a guy named Neil Laurie, who's a wonderful guy, and he'd gotten kind of famous representing a lot of the college athletes around here. So we don't have a single pro sports team in the entire state, which means college football is like the second religion for a lot of people, or first religion for a lot of people. And so Neil had gotten really well known representing a bunch of the athletes when they got in trouble, and so I started working with him, and so I did some criminal defense. I realized I wasn't any good at it. Like I'd look and I'm like, I think they did it. We did some workers' comp. I wasn't that great at that because you were arguing to commissioners who'd been appointed by the governor. But then you also did personal injury. And personal injury, I was like, the people who I don't think are really hurt, I don't want anything to do with those cases. These people who are really hurt are being treated the exact same way. They're being treated like shit.
Yeah.
And as a claim number by insurance folks and these corporate giants, but they're legit people. Man, what if I could just have a practice limited to those type cases and those type people? And when I left, that's been almost 14 years ago. That's what we've been working to build, and closer 14 years in than we were 14 years ago. And like I said, hopefully that the ascent continues.
Yeah, and I think it will. I worked with you in some of these intensive trial lawyers conferences, which isn't, you don't just go and sit there and watch a speaker. I mean, it's hands-on, it's exciting, it's, working on your stuff, and I've always enjoyed working with you. You're a great lawyer, and you're the go-to guy in South Carolina in my book. I had an electrocution case down there that I brought to you because you're the man. And so I hope that we'll continue to be able to work together in the future. And I hope you brought some really exciting South Carolina cases, because you're on Cases Gone Wild. We talk about some of the wildest cases we have. And I know that you've had a lot of really interesting cases. Now, I want to start off with one. You said, I don't know what it's about, but you said you have some kind of case involving an alligator.
Yeah. We got a bunch of alligators down here, which means from time to time there'll be an alligator case. We just wrapped one up recently. Some friends from Atlanta had the case and were kind enough to bring us in and let us work on it. And I can't say we'd ever done an alligator case before, but like so many things practiced in law, now we're almost like quasi-experts when it comes to
alligator handling. So let me ask you, like in Michigan, you'll have like a dog bite case, like your dog will bite somebody or bite the mailman or something. Okay, those are like, straightforward cases. With these alligators, are these people's pets, or are these like wild alligators out there doing stuff?
Yeah, so the latter. So this ended up being a case against an HOA, and kind of a couple of different HOAs. What you had was this huge HOA, and ended up being a confidential thing, so I'll leave the names out. But
so it's like a homeowners association.
Yeah, homeowners association. So there was this massive development, and then within that there were a bunch of smaller HOAs. They call them regimes, like little. They operate them like little fiefdoms, literally.
Okay.
And so this one, what they did is, this was down in Hilton Head, and a lot of folks come from up north. And one of the things that attracts them to the low country part of South Carolina is the wildlife, and in particular, the exotic, unfamiliar, foreign nature of alligators. And so it's kind of like a draw. So for this particular neighborhood, what they did is they built a big horseshoe, and in the middle of the horseshoe, they created a lagoon. And then what they started doing was putting a bunch of fish, basically baiting the lagoon.
This doesn't sound like a good idea.
Dude, terrible idea.
They were
you get rid of, you get rid of like the alligator's natural habitat and reduce their food sources, and then you're like, but wait, we will reintroduce the food sources in people's backyards.
And don't people have dogs and babies and stuff around?
And grandkids too. Yeah, so in this one, what went down, and this is one of the things, it was both a point that we were making, and it was part of the defense. In our case, lady, I think of her as like America's grandmother. I mean, just wonderful lady. Like when you get to her house, she always wanted to like bake you something, or make sure you have like some hot tea or a cup of coffee, or, some sweet tea or something. And what she was doing was walking her dog in her backyard. The problem was, again, everyone's backyard backs up to this lagoon that they, in essence, turned into like an alligator pit. And so she's walking her dog, and she's not that far from the water.
Is there like a fence or anything, or is it just going to the lagoon?
No, in fact, not only is there not a fence, which was one of the points we made, they'd actually mowed the lawn and mowed the grasses around this lagoon all the way down, and gotten rid of the natural grasses, which serve as a visual barrier, just for aesthetic reasons. So they introduce the gators. They attract the gators, and then they remove all natural barriers between the gators and the residents.
I mean, I don't need to be a plaintiff's lawyer to foresee that this could be a really bad idea.
Yeah, and then they say, look, warning alligators, but what they don't say is warning we are baiting the pond for alligators and removing all natural barriers. And also, this particular gator was super hungry because, again, these developments, they get rid of a bunch of the natural habitat, they get rid of a bunch of the natural food sources. This gator was over 8 feet, comes out of the water, and what our client says is it didn't go for the dog. The dog was actually on the opposite side of her, furthest from the water. Gator comes flying out of the water, grabs her, pulls her in, and starts doing what they call like a death.
How old?
Our lady was 80.
Grabbed the 80-year-old lady?
Uh-huh.
No way.
Yeah, starts dragging her in.
The whole lady. She's a big lady. Older lady.
Yeah, she's a full-grown person.
Full-grown person. Oh my God!
But the gator's a lot bigger than her. I mean, the gator's 8 feet. She's about 5'2". The gator's 8'3". Drags her in. She's clawing for her freaking life on the bank, screaming. Thankfully, thank God, one of her neighbors who lived next door from Minnesota, good, upper Midwestern values. They come flying out. The wife grabs our client's hands and is holding her hands.
Oh my God! Well, the gator has her in its mouth.
Yeah, so she's basically being drawn and quartered at that point because the gator's pulling toward the water, and the neighbor, God bless her, is pulling our client back toward the shore. The husband of the neighbor then comes out with a paddle and starts whacking the gator in the head.
Dude, this is like Happy Gilmore with Chubbs.
It is like Chubbs. Yeah, it's just like Chubbs.
So then what happens?
So the gator eventually lets go, but not until, it's wrecked our lady's legs. She ends up keeping her legs, but, severe disfigurement. She can actually hear, it's one of the worst parts about the case, she can hear her femur being crushed.
Oh my God.
It's one of the things that she continued talking about. But she lived. She had, her medical bills were off the chart. Her disfigurement was terrible. Impact on mobility and overall life was awful.
And psychologically, dude, she lives there. Like, how would you go if I got attacked by essentially a prehistoric animal in my own backyard that I knew they were living in my backyard? I'm not going to want to go back there again, and I'm going to be messed up.
She moved.
Yeah. Jeez, this is
crazy.
crazy.
So the crazy part, though, was like we didn't have any law specifically on gators in South Carolina. The closest thing we had was this like crazy raccoon case. For people who've never been to South Carolina, we're not just like alligators and raccoons. John mentioned Charleston. There's a little bit of sophistication here from time to time, but case law was really just on this raccoon. We didn't have anything directly on point. There was a case out of Georgia. Their Court of Appeals helped. Their Supreme Court reversed it, and we were struggling on legal grounds. And every alligator expert we talked to, which was really interesting. These people, because they're so used to dealing with gators, it was like they lost their perspective on how normal people kind of think of and would interact with an alligator.
Yeah.
And so all these alligator experts were blaming Our Lady for walking near the shore with a dog. And it's like, right, but she's not an alligator expert.
Yeah, right.
That's not her thing.
Like, if you know all about alligators, maybe you would know. I'm just going for a walk in my backyard.
Yeah, and it wasn't like she was like, feeding her dog. The dog was on the opposite side of her, furthest from the water. Right. She's not walking like right up on the water. She's back several feet. She's literally like in her backyard. It's where people walk.
Right.
But anyways, so we were like, God, we keep striking out with these alligator people, and it's like, well, hold on now, like, let's not make this an alligator case. Let's quit talking about what the alligator did and focus more, like I was saying at the start of the conversation, on what this HOA did. And then we thought, well, hell, let's go get an HOA expert just to talk about unsafe, unreasonably hazardous conditions, dangerous conditions, creation of hazards, and just kind of make it like a good old-fashioned premises case. And part of doing that was we ended up finding, I was just kind of curious. I was like, I wonder what, there are always these like big declarations they make, right? Like these big kind of overarching statements whenever they're first starting a neighborhood or a company or anything else. And I was like, I wonder, let's get their, like, the articles of incorporation, obviously, but like, let's also get their covenants, their declarations, all the shit they said when they first started for this big grand dream they were building. And sure enough, in their covenants and declarations, they state, we will make certain no dangerous conditions exist in our common areas. And it was like, sweet, thank you for saying it. Thank you for now upping your level of responsibility, your duty to make certain no dangerous conditions existed. And I think what we were able to prove was not only did they not make certain dangerous conditions were eliminated,
they created them.
You got it.
That's crazy. I mean, this whole idea, I think if we boil it down, that they just put a bunch of alligators in people's backyards that are hungry is insane. I mean, I don't know. That's like, it would be like if you're not going to put a bunch of like rabid pit bulls in somebody's backyard area, it's be crazy.
Or a bunch of predators next to a playground.
Right. Exactly. That's a good one. So what ended up happening with the case? Is it still going? Did you guys go to trial or?
Case resolved confidentially after a lot of legal maneuvering.
A lot of money?
I mean, enough for it to be confidential.
Fair enough. All right, good. Well, that's crazy. I've never had an alligator case. I have some wild animal cases I talked about on my show. I have a bat case. These people at an Airbnb were attacked by a horde of bats.
I remember that.
That is still ongoing. I've certainly had dog bite cases. I don't know if I've had any other crazy animal cases, but I know they exist.
If you get a wild animal case, just don't focus on the wild animal. Focus on the human behavior that allowed the wild animal attack to occur. It's like the shit that's not supposed to happen. It's like these attacks are rare. It's like, right. So what is it that was different here that doesn't exist more commonly? And it's usually the human error.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't this case.
Yeah. See, we're lucky in Michigan. We don't have that many crazy animals like that. We have in Detroit, you got to look out for the pit bulls. And, if you go up north, there might be I don't know. If you go really up north, there could be a bear. But that's pretty much it. I mean, we don't have that. We don't have to worry about alligators coming out against us, So that's interesting. Well, okay, tell me about, somebody told me you had a crazy pool case that you wanted to talk about. Tell me about this pool case.
Yeah, so the pool case had just come in right when you and I first met out in Montana. That case had just come in, and so it wasn't the case that I brought with me to workshop, although that was a crazy case too, involving a blind truck driver. Anyways, but that aside, the pool case, what happened was in Memorial Day weekend, so May of 2020, a few months into COVID, families down at this big-ass resort in Myrtle Beach called Caribbean Resort and Villas. This one's not confidential. I like talking about this one.
Yeah, they're the best because we can throw them all under the bus. Tell everything.
Yeah, it's just what they did. They brought it on themselves.
That's right.
And anyways, families down there. Little boy, 3 years old, named Ashton Douglas, spends hour after hour in this lazy river because that was the resort's whole pitch. Like when we unwound it, the resort's entire, business model was based on having kids in pools, which is important to the story. And so this family chose that resort because they got a bunch of pools, because it is so kid friendly. Their marketing worked. And so this little boy, Ashton Douglas, 3 years old, is in the lazy river for a bunch of hours. Doesn't appear to be having any problems. A couple of the other family members, it was a big group down there. They felt like their eyes burning a little bit from some chlorine. They thought something, was messing with their eyes, but they didn't think there was anything, threatening.
And this is like a big river? Is this like where you go on a tube and you just float around and stuff? Or
You got it.
yeah.
You got it. So, anyways, on the way home, this family lived up in North Carolina, like just on the other side of the South Carolina, North Carolina border. Yeah. On the way home, the little boy is like, he's crying and raising hell, which is different from him.
How old was he?
3.
Yeah.
Apparently, again, tough little kid. They were like, Ashton doesn't really fuss. Like, that's not his thing. He's wild. He's a pain in the ass, but like, he's not fussy.
Right.
He was fussing the whole way back. They get him home. He's got some red marks around his groin area. Hours are going by. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And the reason it's getting worse is even though mom, had taken off the wet bathing suit, had wiped him down, had done all the things a normal parent does, again, put him in dry clothes, the whole thing. He'd been exposed to really, really just god awful, horrific, dangerous levels of chlorine in that lazy river for hour after hour. And so the chemicals were burning through his skin. So chlorine oxidizes.
Oh my
in other words,
God.
it burns. And so the chlorine was burning through his skin. And for chlorine, if it's going to burn you somewhere, typically it's going to be either kids or older folks, because their skin is quite literally thinner. Then it's going to be the most sensitive areas, which typically is around private areas. And so for this little boy, it didn't actually burn his genitalia, but all around, especially the right side, kind of all around that pubic area, then around his waistband, all the way around.
Oh my God.
Just got burnt to hell.
How bad was it?
Oh, awful. And we've got we've got some photos of it that tell the story.
So we can see this. Oh my God. This is horrible.
The biggest challenge for this little boy is he doesn't know what's happening. I mean, he's 3, and all he knows is he's hurting. His mom, as a nurse practitioner, she takes him for an evaluation. The folks at the local hospital can't quite figure it out. At first, they think maybe it's something bacterial, like a staph infection. They rule that out. They end up sending him to UNC Chapel Hill, good medical clinic up there. He ends up at the burn center, and they're like, yeah, I mean, this is a chemical burn. Where has he been? They talk about he was at a pool. They say, well, I mean, it's more likely than not, from some pool chemical. The family was smart, and there was an aunt in particular who was like, hey, we need to get in touch with a cousin of ours who's a firefighter to ask him what to do, because I know these firefighters, obviously treat burns. Get in touch with the firefighter. Firefighter says, hey, go get in touch with the Myrtle Beach Fire Department. They reach out to the Myrtle Beach Fire Department. Myrtle Beach Fire Department says, get in touch with Department of Health and Environmental Control. DHEC is the name. It's just the environmental agency that's in charge of all this stuff. DHEC gets someone out there within 48 hours of Ashton being burnt. And when they go and test the water in that lazy river, the chlorine levels are quite literally off the charts. Like, they couldn't measure it because they didn't have a measuring device that went that high.
Wow. Now, what? So what? Why didn't other people get as burned as the kid?
Yes, that was a really big question. The 2 questions that everyone asked is, why didn't other people get as burnt, and why were his burns only in these areas and so bad? The reason that other people didn't get burnt, one of the things is we're not sure that other people didn't get burnt and just didn't know what it was. But the reason he got burnt worse, that we learned from just having to learn a ton about chlorine and all that, was it's all about concentration and duration. So, what they believed was the time that he was in the lazy river, the concentration was likely the highest, and he was also in there, we believe, longer than anybody else that day. Again, he was 3, so he never really, other than eating a piece of pizza, like we got pictures of him eating a slice of pizza, but he's playing in there because he can't really swim, so the lazy river was fun for him because he could just go around on the floats. And so he's in there just hour after hour, and they believe that because of the duration, he got hurt worse than the other folks. Now, there were a couple people from this family alone that had some irritation, like they had some red spots. They had something called like chlorine rash. Mm-hmm. They had some jewelry that faded. They had some bathing suits that faded. But again, this kid got hurt worse, we believe, mainly due to duration. but also the concentration. And the reason that he was damaged primarily in those areas is the combination of the swimsuits are going to hold more of the chlorine pressing against the skin. That's the one part of your body that's going to stay wet, like even if you're not in the pool. And it's the part of your body, especially for a child, where it's the most sensitive skin. It's the most vulnerable.
Yeah, I had a hot tub case once where, like, same thing. They were at a hot tub at like a hotel or something, and their genitals got all burned up. So their wieners were like literally, it looks like someone took a blowtorch to them. Yep. And so it was chlorine stuff.
Yeah.
So what happened with the case? So first of all, were these injuries, how bad were they? Like, were they permanent? Or what was the deal? And did they admit responsibility? The defendant.
Yes on permanency, never on responsibility, which was what really drove the case.
Yeah, why not? They have the water. You guys have the water from the government. What the hell?
Yeah, so their defense was, well, those readings were taken 2 days later, and we don't have any actual readings from the day Ashton was in the pool. The reason they didn't have any actual readings from the day Ashton was in the pool is because they'd been falsifying their books, which we can get to. But yeah, I mean, the permanency, absolutely. I mean, the good part, the good news is he had to undergo a bunch of these laser treatments. And he went through a bunch of laser treatments with an amazing doctor at the Medical University of South Carolina, where it's much better than it was. But I mean, he looks like a burn victim. I mean,
that's
the area
horrible.
To the right of his penis, he's a burn victim.
And that's a bad spot. Like, I'd rather have my arm burned than my penis burned. I mean,
well, dude, think about what it's gonna be like for him in middle school.
Right. High school. His first, romantic experience. I mean, and I'll tell you what, my first romantic experience was embarrassing enough, and I was self-conscious enough. I can't imagine having, what happened to you? Well, I was in a lazy river when I was 3 and it burned my penis off. It's horrible.
I mean, imagine what people, we think about, like, all right, what it's going to be like for this kid in the middle school locker room when the other kids find out, which they're going to.
Right.
And then word spreads, and then the rumors are going to build on the rumor on top. It's just going to get worse. And like you said, I mean, all that embarrassment, anxiety, I went through all the same stuff. I think everybody does.
Yeah.
But to add, like, when he starts to take down his pants and he's already self-conscious that, like,
yeah, right. Out. That's horrible. So tell me about, the resort faked its testing or distribution of chlorine. They lied. That was not good. This place sounds shady as hell, by the way.
Yeah, Caribbean Resort and Villas.
Remind me not to stay there when I come down to visit you.
Yeah, part of Britain Resorts and Hotels. God. Sold to EOS investors, which was another twist in the story. But going back to...
it's always the fucking hedge funds. Every time they buy something, disaster happens because they just want to, like, save as much money and make as much money as possible. All my cases, it's like, how can this happen? They're like, well, we were bought by a hedge fund in London 10 years ago, and we started, doing away with all the safety stuff. It's the same stuff.
Price cutting measures.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We want to pass savings on to the consumers, but we are going to kill a few people along the way.
Right. So what happened? So how'd you find out that they were lying about their books?
So, sometimes, like, the things that busted open are as simple as, some kind of straightforward written discovery. And what happened was, we just want to know, hey, what were your chlorine levels that week? Give us they're called pool logs, right? Like, what were your pool chemical logs for that week? And they sent them over, and I'm looking at them. I'm like, hold on now. Like, the levels were too perfect. And then the other thing I noticed was there was the same initial. It was an R for 6 days in a row. And I started being like, I wonder, 6 days in a row. I don't know. Let's request this dude. His name was Juan Rivera. Let's request Juan Rivera's timesheets, and let's just make sure he was working 6 days in a row. Because I don't know I don't think this dude worked 6 days. It was just a hunch.
Yeah.
And so we requested the timesheets for this guy, and sure enough, May 24th, May 25th, 2020, the days that our little boy was in the pool, Juan Rivera's timesheet showed him working 0 hours both days. All right, so we take his deposition, and it wasn't like he just came right out and said it, but 2.5, 3 hours into his deposition, he finally admitted that, yeah, he didn't work May 24th, didn't work May 25th, came back in and falsified the logs when he returned to work.
He backdated the logs.
He backdated the logs.
And lied about it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then, and this is a case, kind of to again bring it full circle, this was a case that I was talking to one of our instructors out in Montana, Brian Ward, about, and I was like, hey man, want to work on this case? He was like, sure. So we ended up working on the case with Brian and Aaron Powers, who's part of his team. And so I go on break from this deposition, and I'm like, hey Aaron, the dude just admits to falsifying the logs. What you want to do with it? She was like, ask him how long you've been doing it. I was like, that's a good question. We go back on record. I was like, hey man, how long had you been falsifying these pool chemical logs before Ashton ever got in y'all's water? Answer, about a year.
Oh my God.
And then I was like, well, when did you stop? And he was like, when I found out I had to talk to you about this.
Oh!
So we added up, John, it ended up being, he was doing it for 3.5 years.
And so what was he doing? Just like quadrupling the chlorine from not being there for 4 days, or what?
He would just write in on the books, like whatever he wanted to. So what he was doing is days he didn't work, nobody, there was no evidence. There was no evidence that anyone was ever testing it. There was no evidence that anyone was ever documenting. There certainly wasn't any supervision. And then the days he was working, if you looked at the days he was working, like his times were all off because they have like 13 pools. But he claimed to check one pool at one time. Like, I'll give you an example. So he claimed on a day he was working that he checked the chlorine levels of like 4 different pools all at the same exact time. It'd be like,
that's impossible.
Possible.
Well, wow, how'd there get so much chlorine in the pool? He was just dumping it in, or what?
We think it was one of two things. Either they had a machine, what they call like an automatic feeder. It's just like an electronic way of like throwing chlorine in there. Either, they didn't know how to work it, which they didn't. So it was just pumping chlorine in, or they were manually shocking it overnight and being like, whatever.
So what ended up happening in the case?
So it got crazier, and there's some clips of this. Like there's a clip of his supervisor when we're asking his supervisor, a guy named Rob Wright, like, hey, would you like to know how long Juan had been falsifying the logs before Ashton got in the pool? And the dude says, I really don't care.
What?
Shit.
Why did he say that?
Because he's an asshole. I mean, just a bad dude.
Wow.
And then
was there attorneys going nuts? Were there attorneys just like, oh my God?
Yeah, they were. So then we go up another rung to the dude who was like, they called him chief engineer, who was in charge of the department. We started asking him questions. And what happened along the way is we took Juan's testimony and sent it to DHEC, because we thought these people owed the state of South Carolina like $2.7 million for like not keeping their pools and their books and everything in compliance. We weren't going to get any attorney's fees off it. It was just like, man, we could make this agency like $2.5 million. That's cool. So we sent it to them. They ended up not pursuing the civil fines, but they did pursue a criminal case against this dude Rivera. So he ends up getting arrested for forging a state document. The reason I mention this is when we go and depose the head of the department, we start asking that dude about what role he played in these pool chemical logs, and he starts pleading the Fifth Amendment. So I did what we both do, which is like, well, hell, let me just think of every question I could possibly think of.
Sir, isn't it true that you touched a little boy in the chlorine? You can add then, I plead the Fifth. Oh, you plead the Fifth? Okay.
So fast forward, Brian and I work the shit out of this case. My firm's working it, he's working it. At some point, Brian mentions the case to Nick Rowley, who Brian works with, and shows Nick this video. We had this video of our little boy. It's horrific. It's when he is in the hospital, and he's just undergone one of these debridements, and he's screaming and crying. He's so upset. He starts hitting himself in the head to try to distract himself from the pain around his groin. Nick sees that video, and so Nick's like, man, put it on my trial calendar. And it was like, sweet. All right, cool. You want to add Michael Jordan to the team?
Yeah. Come on.
So fast forward, we're just kicking them and kicking them and kicking them. And then Nick comes in off the top rope, and the whole insurance tower eventually collapses shortly before trial for $26 million.
Nice. That's a great result. That's a great result. And, you had all the elements that could be a good verdict on that case. Let me ask you, what was this Rodriguez guy's position? What was his job title?
Yeah, so Rivera was the certified pool operator. So before we got him to admit he was falsifying the stuff, we wanted everyone to acknowledge, because they put it in their discovery, like, on the interrogatories, it's like, hey, who is the person most responsible for this? Who's the person most responsible for that? Just to kind of figure out who we needed to depose. And everything was like, Juan's the man. The whole place depended on Juan for pool chemical safety. He was their certified pool operator, but he was cooking the books.
One thing that I've learned, because I've had some pool cases, not like this. I told you about my spa case. We settled that one pretty quick. The injuries weren't permanent, right? It was a temporary burned penis, not a permanently burned penis. So we settled that out. So, but the one thing that I've kind of learned, because we talk about a lot on this show, is we become experts in little snippets of life, right? Like you probably know a shit ton about alligators now and alligator safety, right? And now you know about chlorine administration at public pools. And I've done a couple pool cases. I had pool experts. I was just shocked at like the lackadaisical kind of operation of these pool managers who a lot of them have no clue what they're doing. I had one against a major hotel chain here in Michigan in Dearborn that had a massive pool. And I, asked the same thing. What happened in my case is a little boy drowned in the pool. He was learning disabled. The pool was videoed. There was literally somebody like watching the pool on a video camera live feed at the time that he died. They didn't do anything. And to make matters worse, my theory of the case was, well, look, like I went to the pool. It was kind of like shabbily maintained. A lot of the lights had burned out. So the pool was so dark that it's an indoor pool, right? And it's so dark that like they were unable to see and supervise this kid who was drowning, and they just weren't able to see it. So, but the point of my story is it's different than a chlorine thing is, I deposed the pool manager guy, and the guy could like had no clue. I'm like, well, what are your credentials? He's like, I was a janitor, and then they just started putting me on pool duty. I'm like, well, he had no clue what he was doing. And I'm not saying, I don't really know the complexity of pools, but I know that a lot of the times these people that are in charge of the pools aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I had another case against Carnival Cruise Line for a pool, and the administrator of the water was like some guy from like Russia who they were able to hire for like cheap. He was the chief engineer from like Moscow who had never really worked on a pool in his life. I think he had like an undergrad degree in engineering from like University of the Kremlin or something, And so they put Comrade, Markovic or whatever in charge of the pool, and he had no fucking clue what he was doing. And it's like crazy. It's like the wolves are running the hen house. So
this was in Myrtle Beach, which is already kind of the Wild West. But the pool stuff, you're right, man. Nobody gives a shit. I mean, they're making a ton of money off
Tons
them.
of
Like
money.
that was their draw, like ton of money. But no, nobody knew anything. Like everybody, I mean, the ironic part in our case was, for as dangerous as the pools were when Juan was there falsifying the logs, they were even more dangerous on the days he wasn't there because nobody knew what the hell to do.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Pools. There's a lot of pool cases out there. People people don't believe it. Drowning in pools, getting burned in pools, too shallow designs of pools. People cracking their heads open. I had a guy that broke his neck in the pool because it was not set up correctly. I mean, it's crazy. That's why people are like, you should get a pool. I'm like, I'm not getting a pool. It's too much work too. Like, unless you have a competent person, like I have a hot tub and that's hard enough, but you just stick the dipstick in and but we digress. This isn't Pools Gone Wild. So let me ask you about destruction of evidence. Okay. Because I have a case right now where, it's a private prison. This is a very famous case. It went up to the Sixth Circuit. We got published opinion on it. We changed the law. I changed the law for the circuits, so Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, I believe. But
Dude, you're doing some amazing shit.
dude, we're just working hard. We're doing the best that we can.
You are working super hard, man.
You are too, man. You are too. So in this case, they're supposed to monitor these children at this private prison. It's like a private youth prison. It's a private youth jail, and they don't do any supervision. And this kid says, I'm going to kill myself. They lock him in his room and he kills himself. He did exactly what he told him he was going to do. He was sad. He was depressed. There was all kind of other stuff. I could do a whole show on this case because it's going to go to trial and I'm going to ask for a lot of money. It was one of the most horrible cases. But what really I think is a major issue for the defendants is, in this case, when they found him hanging dead from a bed sheet in a vent that should have never been there, shouldn't have had a bed sheet, shouldn't have had a vent to tie it to, they backdated all the logs to make it look like they had been looking at him and they didn't do anything wrong. And we know they did because we have a video and it shows that they literally wrote in all the logs. Now, my experience, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, is a defendant would be better off saying, we failed to do our job, we made a mistake, we didn't do the rounds, rather than lying about it and getting caught. So in other words, in your case, do you think they would have been better off saying, look, we didn't monitor the chlorine as closely as we should have, we're sorry, but whatever, either be reasonable or we're not, whatever their bullshit excuse is. But don't you think it's worse that they lied about it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been personal counsel in a couple cases just where, organizations I've been a part of, like one was a charity organization. They screwed up and the kid got a few fingers cut off. It was awful.
Oh my God.
Just insanely dumb. Reckless, so once I got involved, it was like, no, like we were reckless. We don't have the charitable caps on our side. We'd be lucky, to pay $1 million per finger. And even that's insulting. Case went to mediation and got resolved. But I think if in that case, the insurance folks who were obviously running the show, before I was able to come in as personal counsel, if they'd apologized, if they'd waived all affirmative defenses, if they hadn't blamed the parents, which is what they were doing in that case, they could have probably saved, I don't know, a few $100,000, $1 million. I mean, in this pool case, if they'd gone to the family or come to us early on and just said, we're terribly sorry, can we do this, can we do that, this is our fault, we're waiving any affirmative defenses, we're waiving, causation, we don't think there's really any tenable argument there. Will you please be reasonable, and we're going to be reasonable to try to make this right for everyone and make sure this child is taken care of medically and otherwise for the rest of his life.
Right.
We never get there.
Right.
Because and part of it is, you know, the deal, like the more they've allowed you to dig on this prison case, the stronger your case
Oh yeah.
gets. The more we were allowed to dig on the pool case, obviously the stronger that the case got. Like if I were defending, which again I don't, but if I were defending a catastrophic case with a really good plaintiff's lawyer on the other side, you know, I'd do everything I possibly could to try to reach a fair resolution early. Because if you give, you know, Jon Marko or other top tier plaintiffs attorneys a chance to really dig into the why and start uncovering the fraud and the cover up,
It's
the
bad.
number. So, you know, think about, John, how many times you've seen like these incident reports, especially like when kids get hurt. And the incident report, it always reads like so one sided. I mean, it's so like, you know, the daycare, the camp, the pool, whatever, the jail, they did everything right. You know,
Right.
these
Right.
incident reports always like, it's like, no, it's so, I mean, they're just fucking lying.
Lying. It's
Just
lying.
fucking
It's
lying.
lying. So tell me about, we got time for one more case. I heard you had a weirdo psychiatrist case, and there's always a lot of weird doctor cases. I love to talk about like sicko doctor cases because there is a lot of weirdo sicko doctors out there.
Yeah, this was a psychiatrist, and I think, you know, not to be unfair to perfectly sane psychiatrists, but you know, anecdotally at least, there are a lot of odd psychiatrists, and this fella included. And what happened with this guy? There was a this small regional hospital up in North Carolina was opening an outpatient behavioral health unit, and they had to open by January 1 to get their funding. But to open by January 1 and get their funding, they had to have a psychiatrist in place to be like the medical director or whatever of the unit, and they couldn't find anybody. Like they couldn't find anybody, and finally they identified this guy, uh, and this guy had been like in and out of some drug rehabs, and God bless him.
The
I mean, I'm like,
psychiatrist was?
yeah, and I'm like, I'm very sympathetic to anybody struggling with addiction. All for second chances, all for third chances. But if you're gonna give people a second and third chance, you better damn sure
Supervisor.
monitor them. Yeah. So this dude had issues. Then he got in trouble for shoplifting. He claimed that he just like forgot to pay, but when you go back and look at the incident report, like you don't forget to pay for like tires. Um,
Tires.
there was a divorce file on this guy where, you know, he'd allegedly done some shit. Um,
Lot of
physically,
skeletons.
yeah, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. And so what we found out was this hospital is going around to their board of directors literally on New Year's Eve. And this is a long time ago. I think this was like 2014 or something, but it's just a crazy case. They're going around to their board of directors and they're getting signatures from these people, like kind of wherever they are in the world. You know what I mean? Like one dude's overseas, one dude's here, one dude's there. You know, it's New Year's Eve and they're having to gather up enough signatures on January 31st so that this dude can officially start on January 1 and they can get their money. And they do it. And they bring the dude in and he's in charge. And, you know, they just brought a wolf into the hen house and left him totally unsupervised.
Is this like a psychiatric facility or?
Yeah, it's outpatient psychiatric health.
Okay, so
So it's
people go there to see psychiatrists or therapists or something?
You got it. And these are people that this psychiatrist had met while they were in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So it was going to be like a continuation of care deal. And so for our client in particular, he'd met her in the hospital. When he meets her in the hospital, he writes down like how she has trouble with like boundaries with men, how you know, she's totally vulnerable to all types of like manipulation from males and like power positions. Basically, he's coming up with the playbook for how he's going to exploit her. So fast forward, she becomes this patient at the spot in North Carolina. He turns her into his girlfriend.
What?
He turns another patient into his maid, and he has a third patient who's his yard guy.
Is he having sex with them too?
Don't know about the other two, but definitely yes on our girl.
So he's making his patients like go be his maid?
Yeah, and he's also writing her in particular prescriptions for him.
What?
Yeah, so he was kind of strung out on if it wasn't Adderall, it was one of like the Adderall-like drugs.
Yeah.
So he's writing her a prescription to one place in North Carolina, another place in South Carolina to fill his Adderall prescriptions.
Oh my gosh.
And then he tried to claim later on he was giving her Adderall, and it was like, dude, that you're giving somebody who suffers from schizophrenia a Adderall? Like, come on, man, they were for you. And he finally admitted, yeah, they were.
Oh
for
my
him.
gosh. So what happened with this case? Did somebody get hurt, or was it just abusive position, or?
So what happens? He ends up getting physical with her. She goes to
The
the
maid
police.
or the girlfriend?
The girlfriend.
Okay.
The girlfriend. He ends up getting physical with her, and she goes to the police. And now she'd been to the police a ton. Like, again, she suffers from schizophrenia, was living with schizophrenia, so she'd gone to the police a bunch. She thought her dad was the Antichrist at one point, like all the stuff. So the police are like, they're like, okay, well, describe his home. And she's like, it's like this, it's like that. And they're like, all right, describe his bedroom. And she's like, it's like this, it's like that. He's got a bathtub, the bathtub's shaped this way. So cops eventually go and check it out. Sure enough, her story matches up. He admits to it. Hospital finds out. Hospital continues to employ him, sends him to a psychiatric conference in San Diego. And their argument was like, well, this was all outside the course and scope. And we're like, no, hell no, fuck no. Like, he was treating her at y'all's office while at the same time carrying on this relationship. Like, you call it a boundary violation. What we're showing is there were no boundaries whatsoever. She certainly could no longer distinguish between what was the personal relationship and what was the doctor-patient relationship. And then their next defense was, well, I mean, basically the damaged goods defense. Like, can you establish how she's different? Be like, dude, you raped like someone with schizophrenia who already had trouble like trusting people in positions of power, is documented by your doctor. Already had issues with men, is documented by your doctor. And now she's finally making some progress, only to have like the knife put right into her back. Any chance she had of getting better, you've taken away.
So what ended up happening with this case?
This was, I honestly can't remember if this was confidential or not. I think it may have been. The crazy part about it, though, was the psychiatrist right before trial developed Lou Gehrig's disease. So he's like dying of ALS.
Oh my God.
Right as like we're getting ready to start trial. And the Thursday before, his lawyer finally, to his credit, just raised enough hell with the insurance people for them to, in essence, waive the reservation of rights stuff and cut her a check.
Yeah, that's crazy, dude. Well, listen, I got like tons of crazy doctor stories. I got Suboxone Clinic, which is and it's usually they prey on vulnerable people, these sicko doctors. So all the stories I'm about to tell you are the common theme with your story is it's vulnerable population, right? It's vulnerable patients. I got a Suboxone Clinic, so that's for opioid or heroin addicted people to go get Suboxone, which is his treatment. And this lady goes in, and her doctor, in order to give her the Suboxone, was like this old guy, he's like 80 years old, would have her come in and like feel up her chest and start making out with her. And she's like, nobody's ever going to believe me that, because she's a drug addict, right? So like the first thing, if she came into my office or came to the police, they're going to say, okay, you're just setting this guy up because you think maybe you can get a quick buck, right? I mean, let's be honest. That's, I think, what would go through a lot of people's minds. So being the street smart woman that she is, during one of her next appointments, she records the appointment on a video, like she had her phone in her purse, like slightly out. And I shit you not. So when she came to me, I said, I don't believe you. She goes, watch this. She goes in, says, oh, you're here for Suboxone? He's like, Okay, you know the drill. Starts making out with her. You can hear him slurping on the video. It's disgusting. So we try to get the case settled. They won't settle. I'm like, all right, well, we're going to file this lawsuit. You're going to, have license implications, whatever. He denies that anything happens, and then we hit him with the video, and it's like, over. But, the sad thing about that for that poor woman is if she didn't have a video, she would have never have had a case, and nobody would have believed her, and that doctor would still be out there. So that's an example. We had a doctor in the Macomb County Jail that we sued who was, first of all, and no offense to jail doctors out there, I'm sure there's probably some good ones somewhere. I just haven't met them yet. Okay. I feel like a lot of these jail doctors are either at the very beginning of their career, which is fine to get experience, or they're like washouts. They work for companies like Medcare Solutions, these like private prison companies that they staff these prisons with these very low quality doctors who usually have problems. Like your guy obviously was kind of a reject. I mean, he had a lot of issues, and I'm all for second chances, but you have to supervise them. And in the Macomb County Jail, they were putting female patients alone with this doctor, and the females would be able to request, they would say, like, for example, like, my back hurts, I need to see doctor, whatever, so-and-so. And they'd go in there, and he would actually touch their privates and, grab them, fondle them, and then in exchange for allowing them, he would write them scripts. So he would say, here's an extra mattress pad, or here's some candy. He'd give them candy. I mean, it's like a predator stuff, right?
Our guy called it the quid pro quo.
The quid pro quo.
He had to teach her what quid pro quo meant so she could understand that her having sex with him meant she got the drugs she needed.
Yeah. And so he would do this. And again, these women reported him. They did an investigation. He denied it. He would have probably gotten away with it because they would have said, oh, it's these criminals, right? Well, they go into his phone, and he tape recorded on his phone for his own personal pleasure after hours so he could watch the video when no one was around in his bedroom with his lotion. He tape recorded him putting his hand down in their panties and, doing digitally penetrating them. And he denied that was his hand, except they were able to link up a tattoo or something to him. And then the jig was up, so that is another example of these doctors taking advantage of people. And, I love, there's so many good doctors. I'm not trying to bash on doctors, but just like there's bad lawyers, there's bad cops, there's bad pool people, as we say on the show, there's bad anybody. But it seems like, especially in these vulnerable, underserved positions where there's probably not as much resources, not as much money, when you're trying to find anybody to do it, that's what'll happen. And it's just a shame.
I say it a lot, without any social commentary aside, it just is a fact. Being poor or being sick and poor, is dangerous.
Yeah,
it's just dangerous.
And then add being a minority into the mix, and you're completely screwed. I said on my I had a $3 million plus verdict in my first med mal case in Wayne County. It was a zero offer case, and we had an African-American client, and I'm going through the stuff, and I'm just I'm sitting with my trial team, and I'm they're like, well, this would never happen to us. I'm like, you're right. This wouldn't happen to us, but it's not. It's because we would never be treated like that. And anyways, it's a fact of life. But look, we could talk about the social woes. We're going to have to try to fix them one case at a time. And I'm really proud of what you're doing. It's really fun having you on the show. I want to get down to South Carolina, although I'm not going to any pools while I'm down there. And I'd like for you to come up, Kenny, and join us for a very special conference that we're having. Samantha Teal and myself are putting on. We have some great people coming. Nick Rowley, Ryan Brighter, who was on 2 weeks ago's episode, Haitham Faraj, who was on 3 weeks ago's episode. June 20th and 21st, right here in Detroit, Michigan Trial Lawyers Summit 2025. Can you come? I really would love to see you and host you.
I'll be there.
Amazing, my man.
I'll be there. Can't wait. I've never been to Detroit.
We're gonna have fun. I'm gonna show you a good time. The city is doing great. It's prosperous. It's growing in population. I know Detroit 10 years ago had a bad rap. Some of it was deserved, some of it not so much, but it's a much different place than it was. You can go to mtlsummit.com. That's mtlsummit.com to register for the conference. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have some great speakers. And thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, Kenny, and I hope to see you soon.
Can't wait, man. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody. It's been another great episode of Cases Gone Wild. Special thanks to my guest from the Palmetto State, Mr. Kenny Berger, the man. If you have a problem down in SC, make sure you give him a call. Anywhere else, you're going to call me, Jon Marko, at Marko Law. That's markolaw.com. 833 Marko Law, MAKRO Law. Give us a call. We'll see you in another 2 weeks on another great episode of Cases Gone Wild.